The lagoon lies silent under a pall of morning fog, its waters flat as glass and heavy with the taste of salt and decay. A lone motorboat cuts through the stillness, its hum swallowed by the mist, as if the air itself resents intrusion. Somewhere ahead, the silhouette of a bell tower emerges, fractured, skeletal, defiant against centuries of abandonment. This is Poveglia, a sliver of cursed earth just south of Venice, known to fishermen as l'Isola dei Morti, the island of the dead. Locals do not approach it. Even the gulls seem to avoid circling above. From the canals of Venice, one can sometimes see its outline, a broken horizon of brick and ivy, but the locals avert their gaze. They whisper that the soil here is thick with ash and bone, that the air carries the weight of 50,000 unburied souls. It is said that when the wind shifts from the south, it carries the cries of the dying across the lagoon. A fisherman once claimed that his oars refused to touch the water near Poveglia, as if something below the surface was pulling them back. If you believe in ghosts, this island may change your mind. Like, follow, and share to keep exploring the world's darkest places. Long before it became a graveyard for the damned, Poveglia was just another small island in the Venetian Lagoon, a refuge of fishermen, salt workers, and farmers. The earliest records trace its existence to the year 421 AD, when a handful of families sought shelter from invading barbarians who were ravaging the mainland. Over time, these settlers built wooden homes, planted vineyards, and raised children under the protection of the Republic of Venice. Poveglia was small, but it thrived quietly for centuries, a self-contained community living between the tides. Yet Venice, that shimmering city of marble and intrigue, was never far away. Its politics and wars spread across the lagoon like ripples. During the War of Chioggia in 1379, when Venice battled the Genoese fleet, the government decided to evacuate Poveglia's inhabitants. The island was fortified, occupied by soldiers, then left desolate once the fighting subsided. The families never returned. Over the decades, its fields grew wild, the walls crumbled, and the wind began to whisper through its empty corridors. That was when the first rumors began, that something had awakened on Poveglia after everyone left. By the mid-16th century, Venice had become both a jewel of the Adriatic and a trap for death. Its canals, beautiful yet stagnant, bred sickness, and when the plague returned, as it often did, the Republic sought to contain the contagion by exiling the infected to the outer islands. Poveglia, long abandoned, was perfect for this grim duty. Barges began to arrive under cover of night, carrying men, women, and children too weak to protest. Their faces were wrapped in linen, their bodies trembling with fever. They were unloaded onto the island like cargo, left among hastily erected tents and burning pyres. The smell of smoke and rot hung over the lagoon for miles. Some accounts speak of guards in long-beaked masks, the plague doctors walking the shores to ensure none escaped. But there was nowhere to go. The water itself was a barrier of exile. Over time, Poveglia became less a quarantine station and more a necropolis. When the pyres could no longer consume the endless corpses, the Venetians dug pits, filling them layer upon layer with the dead. The soil grew thick, black, and heavy. Even now, archaeologists claim that more than half the island's ground is composed of human ash and bone. To walk upon it is to tread on history's most silent cemetery. Venetian chroniclers avoided writing too much about Poveglia, perhaps out of superstition, perhaps out of guilt. Yet fragments of testimony survived, letters, diaries, merchant logs. They speak of nights when the flames never stopped, when the entire island glowed like a lantern of damnation. Sailors reported seeing shapes moving through the smoke, shapes that did not burn. Others claimed to hear chanting, prayers, or curses, carried by the wind. The Republic forbade civilians from entering, but rumors persisted of scavengers who sneaked ashore to steal jewelry or tools from the dead, only to vanish themselves. Those who survived told of strange sensations, the air growing thick, whispers that seemed to echo from beneath the soil, and a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. When the plague finally receded, Poveglia was left scorched and silent, a monument to human fear. No one wanted to live there again. The lagoon reclaimed its shores, ivy and moss crept over the ruins, and for a century the island slept, or pretended to. Centuries passed, and yet Poveglia's grim reputation only deepened. In 1776, Venice's Public Health Office reclaimed the island for official use, transforming it once again into a quarantine zone, this time for ships arriving from distant ports suspected of carrying the plague or other diseases. Quarantine officers, known as Guardiani della Sanità, patrolled its shores, burning contaminated goods and isolating sailors who showed even the faintest signs of illness. The sick were confined to the lower floors of the old fortress, while the healthy waited above, praying that the days would pass without fever. At night, the cries of the dying drifted across the lagoon, echoing against the marble of Venice's grand palazzos. Families begged for mercy, offering gold to retrieve loved ones from the island, but few ever returned. It was said that those who survived Poveglia's quarantine never truly escaped it. They carried the island with them, in their dreams, in the shadows that followed them home. By the 18th century, Venetian law had already baptized the island as a place where God turned his face away. After the fall of the Venetian Republic in 1797, Poveglia briefly passed under the control of the French, then the Austrians, and later the newly unified Italian state. Yet through each era, the island remained a place of isolation, not of habitation. By the mid-19th century, it was no longer a formal lazaretto, but still used intermittently to contain outbreaks of cholera and typhus. The nearby fishermen began to alter their routes to avoid its shadow, claiming their nets pulled up bones from the seabed. Children growing up in Venice were told bedtime warnings, "Behave or we'll send you to Poveglia." Even priests avoided mentioning it during sermons, as if the mere name could invite misfortune. Travelers passing through the lagoon sometimes described hearing bells from the island's derelict campanile, though no one had tended it for decades. Some claimed the sound came not from the tower, but from beneath the earth itself. Poveglia had become less a place and more an idea, the embodiment of every unspoken fear Venice had ever tried to drown. By the early 20th century, Italy faced a growing need for facilities to house the mentally ill, the elderly, and the chronically sick, those society preferred not to see. And so, in 1922, Poveglia was chosen once more for a purpose cloaked in mercy, but rooted in exile. The abandoned quarantine buildings were repurposed into a psychiatric hospital, their brick walls patched and painted white, though the smell of dampness and decay never left. Ferries brought the patients under cover of fog, just as centuries earlier the plague ships had. Officially, it was a place of rest and treatment, a haven for those too fragile for the world beyond. But the reality was far more sinister. The staff was minimal, the resources scarce, and the island's isolation perfect for secrecy. The screams that echoed across the lagoon returned once again, not of the dying, but of the living. Nurses whispered of strange movements at night, doors opening without touch, bedsheets pulled from sleeping patients, shadows crossing the hallways where no light shone. Some said the past had seeped into the mortar of the walls, and the souls of the plague dead now whispered to the mad, urging them to join their ranks beneath the soil. It was here that Poveglia's reputation transcended legend. It became cursed fact, whispered in hospitals across Venice as a warning, and in taverns as a dare. Among those who presided over Poveglia's hospital was a man known only as Il Dottore del Campanile, the doctor of the bell tower. His real name, lost or deliberately erased from records, survives only in fragments of rumor and testimony. According to local stories, he arrived in the late 1930s, a physician fascinated by experimental psychiatry and eager to leave his mark on modern medicine. But on Poveglia, he found no oversight, no accountability, only walls and patients who could not speak for themselves. Witnesses claimed he began conducting lobotomies with crude instruments, chisels, hammers, makeshift drills. Patients were strapped to tables beneath the bell tower, their screams muffled by the crashing tide. He told his colleagues he was curing madness, but the results were monstrous. Hollow-eyed figures wandering the halls, their minds broken, their bodies trembling from unseen terror. Some nurses fled, others stayed silent out of fear. In time, even the doctor began to change. He told staff that voices followed him at night, whispering from the walls. One morning his quarters were found empty. Witnesses claimed they saw his silhouette at the top of the bell tower, swaying as if listening to something below. Moments later he fell, or was pushed, to his death. Fishermen later said they heard the bell toll that night for the first time in decades, though no one had touched the rope. After the doctor's death, the hospital descended into a silence more terrible than screams. The surviving patients, those who still had the strength to speak, claimed they could hear him walking the halls at night, his steps uneven, dragging, as though the fall had broken more than his body. Nurses refused to work near the bell tower, and when they did, they swore that the air turned cold and that whispers rose from the cracks in the walls. The hospital administration tried to maintain order, filing reports of structural instability, to explain away strange sounds and missing equipment. But within months, the staff began to leave one by one. Some cited nerves, others inexplicable fatigue. Those who stayed said they felt watched at all times. Records from the 1940s show an unusual number of suicides among both patients and personnel. Hangings, drownings, a few vanishing without trace. By 1946, a priest was brought to the island to perform an exorcism, though officially it was recorded as a blessing ceremony. He left before nightfall, visibly shaken, refusing to speak of what he had seen. The following year, the hospital was quietly decommissioned. The patients transferred to mainland institutions, their files redacted or lost. What remained was the echo of decades of suffering, corridors lined with rusting beds, walls carved with words no one could translate, and beneath it all, the faint toll of a bell that had long since been broken. For a time, Poveglia was left to rot in peace. The lagoon slowly reclaimed its kingdom of stone and sorrow. Ivy devoured the buildings, and the bell tower, stripped of its bell, became a hollow sentinel watching over the ruins. In the decades that followed, the island fell into myth once more. Venetians told stories in hushed tones, warning tourists never to approach. They said strange lights danced among the trees at night, that the air shimmered as if filled with invisible flame. Fishermen spoke of screams echoing over the water when the fog was thickest, and of unseen hands tugging their nets from below. Some claimed that animals refused to set foot on the island. Dogs would whimper and pull away from their leashes as boats drifted near. In the 1960s, a brief attempt was made to reopen the hospital as a geriatric facility, but it failed within months. The staff reported constant mechanical failures, sudden illnesses, and unbearable sensations of dread. When the last caretaker left, he locked the gates behind him and tossed the keys into the sea. Since then, no one has lived there again. The lagoon became its only companion, whispering secrets that no human ear could bear for long. By the 1970s, Poveglia was no longer just an island. It was an obsession. Venetian authorities sealed it off completely, declaring it government property and forbidding entry under threat of fine or imprisonment. Yet the forbidden has always tempted the curious. Teenagers dared each other to sail near it under moonlight. Artists claimed to have painted it from afar, only to destroy their canvases afterward, and fishermen swore that their compasses spun wildly when they passed too close. In nearby taverns, old men whispered about the red fog that sometimes drifted from its shores, thick and glowing faintly like embers. Some said it was the burning of the restless dead. Others said it was a trick of the lagoon's gases. But the stories persisted. In 1982, a small group of urban explorers reportedly snuck onto the island at night with flashlights and cameras. Only one returned. His story was incoherent, fragmented. He spoke of hearing voices beneath the floor, of footsteps circling their camp, of his friend's scream, swallowed by the mist. When asked what had happened, he simply said, "It didn't want us there." He was later admitted to a psychiatric clinic in Mestre, where he refused ever to sleep with the lights off again. That report never made the papers, but in Venice, everyone heard about it. The legend of Poveglia spread beyond Italy's borders in the late 20th century, carried by journalists, television crews, and thrill-seekers hungry for proof of the supernatural. Paranormal investigators from Britain, the United States, and Japan arrived in Venice seeking permits to film on the island. Most were denied. Some went illegally, and not all returned. In 2009, a famous American television crew from Ghost Adventures spent the night in the old hospital ruins, capturing what they claimed were whispers, phantom footsteps, and sudden temperature drops. One cameraman fainted after hearing a disembodied cry echo through the stairwell of the bell tower. The footage went viral, reigniting global fascination. Yet beyond the spectacle, others came, independent researchers, historians, even priests, trying to document the tangible. They found medical tools rusted into the floors, journals half consumed by mold, and stone corridors where moss grew like veins. Some reported seeing faces reflected in broken glass. Others said they heard murmured prayers in Latin when no one was speaking. Still, skeptics insisted it was all exaggeration, a product of hysteria and suggestibility. But those who've walked among Poveglia's ruins claim that skepticism itself dies the moment you step ashore, that the silence there is not absence, but presence. As the new millennium unfolded, Venice began to view Poveglia not merely as a haunted relic, but as an untapped asset, a forgotten property in need of profit. The Italian government, desperate to reduce its maintenance costs, announced a plan to lease the island to private investors. In 2014, the bidding opened. Poveglia would be offered on a 99-year lease, with the hope of transforming it into a luxury resort or wellness retreat. The move sparked outrage among locals and historians alike. "You cannot build spas on bones," one Venetian academic protested. Yet bids arrived, driven by curiosity as much as greed. The winning offer came from a businessman who promised to restore the historic buildings while respecting their legacy. But almost immediately, complications began. Construction crews refused to work after nightfall, claiming they heard voices echoing through the empty hospital corridors. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, generators shutting down, tools vanishing, lights flickering without reason. A diver sent to survey the foundations beneath the pier surfaced, trembling, muttering that he had seen faces staring back at him from the depths. Within months, the project collapsed. The investor withdrew, citing technical and logistical impossibilities. The official report blamed bureaucracy, but those who worked there whispered a different truth. Poveglia would not let itself be disturbed. Outrage turned to activism. In 2015, a movement called Poveglia per tutti, Poveglia for everyone, emerged, led by Venetian citizens who believed the island should belong to the people, not corporations. They envisioned it as a public park, a space of remembrance rather than erasure. Their campaign gained traction, gathering thousands of signatures and attracting worldwide attention. Volunteers sailed to the island to clean debris and document its condition, but many reported strange experiences. Phones losing signal, compasses pointing inland, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. One volunteer, a historian named Alessandra, described hearing faint singing in the hospital courtyard, like a child's lullaby carried by the wind. The group eventually won partial access rights, yet restoration proved almost impossible. The structures were too unstable, the air thick with mold and silence. Even official inspections often ended early. Engineers complained of nausea and vertigo that vanished the moment they left the island. Today, Poveglia remains under partial protection, its fate uncertain. The citizens still hope to reopen it, but the island endures as it always has, beautiful, decaying, and unwilling to forget. It begins with the sound of water, the steady slap of oars against the lagoon as a small motorboat glides through the darkness. The camera follows from behind, the glow of Venice fading to a distant shimmer. Ahead, Poveglia rises from the fog like a mirage of ruin. The boatman, an old Venetian with hands cracked by salt and time, mutters that he will not set foot on the island. People go there, he says, but they don't come back the same. He kills the engine a few meters from shore. The explorer, our stand-in for every curious soul who's ever defied superstition, steps onto the pier, flashlight trembling. The air changes instantly. It feels thicker, colder, as though invisible threads cling to the skin. Each step toward the crumbling hospital feels like trespass. The vegetation has devoured the pathways, roots splitting ancient bricks, vines curling through shattered windows. The bell tower looms overhead, its silhouette slicing the mist. The explorer pauses, breath visible, microphone catching faint static. In the silence between heartbeats, a sound arises, a whisper, indistinct but unmistakably human. It comes from within the ruins, carried on the stale breath of centuries. The camera shakes slightly as he turns toward the sound. "Hello?" he calls. The darkness answers with a hollow echo. Inside, the hospital feels frozen in time. Rusted beds line the corridors, their metal frames etched with corrosion and salt. Fragments of porcelain tiles crunch underfoot, and the faint odor of antiseptic lingers beneath the rot. The flashlight beam slides across graffiti carved by forgotten hands. "Aiutami, sono qui." Help me. I am here. Dust swirls like smoke in the beam, forming shapes that dissolve when touched by light. The explorer descends into the lower wards, where the doctor once performed his treatments. The air grows colder with every step. The microphone begins to crackle again, a rhythmic interference, almost like breathing. Then a thud. Something moves beyond the doorway, a shadow darting past the frame. He follows, calling out again. The camera pans to an open room, rusted instruments scattered on a table, straps hanging from the ceiling. The beam lands on a dark stain along the floor, long since dried but unmistakable. The audio recorder picks up a faint sound, the toll of a bell. Just one note, distant and wrong. He freezes. The bell hasn't existed for decades, and yet it rings again, low and hollow, vibrating through the walls like a heartbeat beneath the stone. The flashlight flickers, then dies. The screen goes black, and in that darkness, a whisper, "Stay." The camera flickers back to life in fragments, distorted, grainy, its focus shifting, as though something unseen now holds it. The explorer's breathing is ragged, the beam of a backup flashlight cutting through the dark in desperate arcs. The walls seem closer, warped by shadows that move against the light. Every surface glistens with condensation, yet the air is dry, unnaturally so. A door slams somewhere deep within the building, though no wind stirs. The explorer moves cautiously toward the stairwell, muttering to himself to stay calm, but his voice sounds hollow, almost distant, as though the island is swallowing it. The bell rings again, closer this time, not from the tower, but from beneath the floor. He kneels, pressing his ear to the cracked tiles, and for a moment there is silence, then whispers rising from below. Dozens of them overlapping, unintelligible yet rhythmic, like a prayer spoken backwards. He stumbles backward, flashlight shaking as the whispers grow louder, more urgent, until they erupt into a scream. The floorboards groan and shift under his feet. The camera drops, showing his trembling hand reaching for the recorder. A voice, unmistakably human, impossibly close, hisses, "Why did you come back?" The flashlight dies again. In the darkness, something breathes beside him. He runs. The camera bounces violently, catching glimpses of collapsing walls and rusted doors, swinging open as if pushed by invisible hands. The corridors seem endless, looping back upon themselves. His panting fills the air, mingled with the sound of dragging steps behind him. Soft, deliberate, keeping pace. At last, he bursts into the courtyard, moonlight filtering through the mist. The bell tower looms ahead, its shadow slicing the fog like a blade. The air vibrates with a low hum, almost imperceptible, but felt deep in the chest. He turns toward the lagoon, but the boat is gone. Or perhaps never was. In its place, the water churns softly, reflecting no stars. Drawn by some compulsion, he approaches the tower. The door creaks open without touch. Inside, the spiral staircase rises into darkness. Steps slick with centuries of moisture. He hesitates, then begins to climb. Each step echoes like a heartbeat. Halfway up, a whisper grazes his ear. Up! His breath catches. He continues, driven not by courage, but by something older, magnetic. At the top, where the bell once hung, he finds nothing but the hollow frame and the open sky. The lagoon spreads below, silent and infinite. He exhales, and from behind him, another breath answers. The screen cuts to static, then silence. Weeks later, a fisherman found a waterproof camera case drifting near the edge of the Venetian Lagoon. Inside, beneath a layer of silt, were several memory cards, corroded, but intact enough to recover fragments. The authorities claimed it was debris from a tourist boat, yet word spread quickly that it belonged to a man who had vanished while exploring Poveglia under the cover of fog. The recovered footage was incomplete. Minutes missing, timestamps corrupted, sound warped by distortion that technicians could not explain. Still, enough remained to spark a frenzy. Online forums debated every frame. Paranormal investigators slowed down the audio, amplifying background noise until faint voices emerged, whispers saying, "Stay, listen, don't." Experts dismissed it as pareidolia, the human tendency to find meaning in randomness. Yet those who listened late at night swore they heard something else, not voices, but breathing, matching their own, as though something on the recording was listening back. The Venetian police sealed the evidence, citing privacy concerns, but a few clips leaked online. One showed the bell tower in complete darkness, the beam of a flashlight trembling across its base before the screen went black. Another, only 2 seconds long, captured a distant silhouette at the top of the tower, motionless, staring straight into the lens. The frame ended with static and the faint toll of a bell. Authorities launched a brief inquiry, but the results were as murky as the lagoon itself. No body was ever found, no official cause of disappearance recorded. The fisherman who discovered the camera later refused interviews, saying only that the water didn't feel right that day. Meanwhile, journalists tried to piece together the explorer's story. His online posts about forbidden places, his fascination with haunted ruins, his final message sent hours before the trip. "If I don't come back, I'll still be there." His friends dismissed it as dark humor, but the words took on a haunting prescience. Soon after the footage surfaced, tourists began arriving at Venice, asking about private tours to Poveglia, forcing local authorities to reinforce the ban once again. Yet at night, small lights are sometimes seen crossing the lagoon, boats without permits drifting toward the forbidden shore. Some claim they're thrill-seekers, others whisper they're drawn there, the way a flame calls to a moth. What none of them know is that since the day the footage was found, the bell tower of Poveglia has rung twice more. No one knows who heard it first. No one dares to check if the bell still exists. There is a heaviness to Poveglia that defies the passing of time, a gravity that pulls at memory itself. Historians say the island is haunted not by spirits, but by the collective guilt of a civilization that built its wealth upon suffering. Venice, the jewel of the sea, could not exist without its shadows, and Poveglia became that shadow made flesh. When visitors gaze across the lagoon, they see beauty, but beneath that beauty lies the echo of thousands who were cast aside in the name of survival. The island, in its silence, remembers them all. Archaeologists who once sought to study its soil now refuse to return. They speak of unease, of instruments malfunctioning, of compasses spinning as though magnetized by grief. One scientist, after collecting samples, wrote that the ground felt alive, like something breathing beneath my feet. When he later analyzed the samples under a microscope, he found an unusually high concentration of carbon, ash, bone, and something else he could not classify. His notes ended abruptly with a line underlined 3 times. It's not just the dead here, it's what they left behind. Poveglia endures because it reflects what humanity wishes to forget: disease, madness, abandonment. It is not merely haunted by ghosts, it is haunted by us. The same fear that once sent plague victims to its shores now drives people to seek it out, to test themselves against the darkness. Perhaps deep down, we are drawn to such places because they remind us of the fragility of our own lives, of how easily civilization crumbles when death whispers too closely. The island has become a mirror of conscience, showing us what happens when compassion ends and survival begins. Today, from Venice's promenades, you can see it shimmering across the water, untouched yet impossibly present. Tourists photograph it from a distance, unaware that fishermen still make the sign of the cross when passing its line of sight. At sunset, when the lagoon glows crimson and the horizon dissolves into haze, the bell tower seems to tilt slightly, as if listening. And if the wind is right, a faint sound drifts across the water, not a scream, not quite a bell, but something between the two, like history itself, refusing to be silent. Night falls over the Venetian Lagoon like a veil of smoke. The waters lie still, reflecting the faint shimmer of the stars as a thin mist begins to gather. Across the expanse, Poveglia waits, a silhouette of ruin and memory, framed by the moon. The camera drifts once more across the water, tracing the ghostly path of the explorer's final journey. But this time, something feels different. The perspective wavers, as though shot from a dream. The sound of distant bells carries softly through the fog. Not one, but many, their tones weaving together in a mournful harmony that seems to come from beneath the waves. The lens closes in on the bell tower, its windows like hollow eyes watching the world that forgot it. As the tide rises, the mist thickens, swallowing the shoreline. In that haze, figures begin to appear, faint silhouettes walking the island's paths, dressed in rags and hospital gowns, faces blurred as if by water. They move without sound, gathering near the tower, looking upward. For a moment, the island seems alive again, breathing in unison with the tide. The camera lingers on one figure, a man in a doctor's coat, his back turned, head bowed. Slowly he looks toward the camera, and though his face is lost to shadow, a voice, calm, almost tender, whispers, "They never left." The bells toll again, and the screen fades to black. When the darkness lifts, dawn is breaking over Venice. The lagoon glows pale gold, the city stirring with its morning rhythm, gondolas cutting through the water, birds circling the rooftops. Yet beyond the canals, Poveglia remains shrouded in fog. as if time itself refuses to move there. The final shots show the island from above. The ruins half swallowed by trees, the hospital's roof collapsed inward like a wound. A soft sound plays beneath the narration, the low hum of wind through stone, almost like breathing. The narrator's voice returns, quiet and reverent. Every city has its secrets, every sea keeps what it's given, and some places like Poveglia remember everything. As the words fade, the camera drifts lower, gliding over the courtyard where vines creep through the cracks of forgotten graves. A gust of wind rises, scattering dust, or perhaps ash, across the lens. For a fleeting moment, it forms the shape of a face, then vanishes. The last frame settles on the bell tower once more, bathed in light. It stands silent, empty. Then faintly, a single bell tolls, long, low, and final. The sound lingers over the water long after the screen goes dark. They say the lagoon has a memory, that it dreams at night. The fishermen who still work its waters speak of strange currents that shift without wind, of sudden warmth blooming beneath the surface as though the sea itself were breathing. Sometimes, at the border between night and dawn, the mist thickens and the outline of Poveglia seems to change. The tower leans closer, the ruins seem rearranged, the island subtly alive. No one can explain it. Scientists claim it's an illusion born of humidity and light refraction. Poets say it's the weight of history pressing upward from below, the dead rewriting their geography one sigh at a time. And somewhere in Venice, in an old archive forgotten by bureaucrats, lies a sealed box containing fragments of film and sound recordings, the last pieces recovered from the explorer's camera. Every decade, someone opens the file, listens, and quickly closes it again. They all describe the same thing, a faint heartbeat beneath the static, steady, human, impossibly alive. Yet when analyzed by machines, no such sound exists, only silence and the whisper of water. Perhaps the lagoon remembers what we cannot bear to. Perhaps Poveglia does not haunt us because it is cursed, but because it refuses to be forgotten. The final image returns to the lagoon at dusk. Venice gleams in the distance, its bells ringing for vespers, the call of the living echoing across the still water. The camera pans slowly toward Poveglia, now little more than a smudge of shadow on the horizon. The narrator speaks one last time, voice hushed, almost prayerful. Some places cannot be exorcised. They do not fade when we stop believing in them. They wait. The music swells, a mix of strings and distant choral voices as the horizon darkens. Then, without warning, a light flickers in the bell tower's highest window, faint but steady. The sound of a breath, close, near, human, fills the speakers. The light fades. Silence. The credits begin to roll over the lapping of the tide, the sound of oars fading into distance. Yet as the final note dissolves, a single, almost imperceptible sound remains, the toll of a bell, echoing not across the lagoon, but from within it, and then nothing. Only water, memory, and the whisper of Poveglia still waiting beneath the mist.